It's a great pleasure to be here, and I feel very strengthened by the forum that where we are sitting, because I have two compatriots there. One compatriot I just met a few minutes ago, it's Mr. Sparreboom from the Netherlands. The other compatriot I met almost 40 years ago. It's our Statistician General, and he is a fellow Mosotho, because I was 40 years ago a migrant worker in Lesotho at the National University of Lesotho. And I'm making this little joke to show you how the concept of migration can be employed in many ways, but it is actually true. So at a more formal way, I would say, Mr. Pali Lehoogla, our Statistician General here in South Africa, Morena. Mr. Convender, the acting DDG in the Department of Labor. And of course, my fellow speaker, Mr. Musabayana, the Deputy Director, ILO Decent Work Team for Southern and Eastern Africa, and the country office here in Pretoria. And of course, my other fellow speakers in the forum and distinguished guests. As we all know, immigration today is at the heart of many debates in national and in international politics today at this very moment. And this definitely applies to the European Union and its member states, its 28 member states, but also to South Africa. Europe, located at the northern part of the continent, and of the African continent, and South Africa, part of the continent, but located at its extreme southern tip, we both are confronted with rapidly increasing numbers of immigrants, many of them illegal, and the issue of immigration is often discussed in both Europe and in South Africa in very negative terms. And large parts of our population, again both in South Africa and Europe, are very critical and increasingly opposed to further migration. So we have quite a few problems in common. And I will come back later at what is happening at the Mediterranean, just to show that South Africa and immigration, it's not a unique problem at all. We confront this in Europe as well, and it's a tough debate. But it is therefore a great pleasure to participate today in this National Consultation Seminar, which marks the launch in South Africa of the project assessing the economic contribution of labor migration in developing countries as countries of destination. It's a much more positive environment where we, I hope, can come to forward-looking and to solutions. This project is co-funded and jointly implemented, as you know, by the EU, the OECD Development Center, and of course the International Labour Organization, and it will run in 10 low and middle income countries selected on the basis of the substantial share that immigrants represent in the country population, and where preferably the annual number of immigrants inflows exceeds the number of emigrant inflows. So the immigration higher than emigration. That is how these 10 countries were selected. Now the choice and the involvement of South Africa through Statistics South Africa and through other national departments will obviously be a very important contribution to the relevance but also to the success, which we are sure that will happen, the success of this program. The recent xenophobic unrest here in South Africa, leading to the death, as we all know, of 7 people, the displacement of thousands of people, looting of foreign-owned shops and businesses, reminded us of the 2008 violence. And of course, like we do in Europe, these events should be analyzed against the background of what is happening in South Africa and what is happening in Europe as well. high unemployment in South Africa and in large parts of Europe, notably amongst the youth. Unemployment in Spain amongst youth is now almost as high as in South Africa. And this all contributes to dissatisfaction, it contributes to anger, and it feeds aggression against migrants, who are often easy targets here and elsewhere in the world. So we need to look and to create, if you like, a much more positive discourse on the economic contribution of immigration, to be based, obviously, on facts and on analysis. By improving knowledge and awareness on the role of migrants, we contribute to better designed labor and migration policies. We create opportunities for sustainable growth as well as true respect for migrants' rights. Because let there be no misunderstanding, and you forgive me that I regularly refer to Europe, without migrants we will not be able to continue to live in Europe as we do at the moment, in spite of all the difficulties that we have. And this very project that we are launching today, by developing and applying an assessment methodology and gathering primary and secondary data, has a most important role to play in terms of policy preparation, formulation, recommendations in the 10 countries, including and particularly in South Africa. This important project will, of course, not start from scratch here in South Africa. It will benefit significantly from earlier efforts, including from the Migration for Work Research Consortium, led by the African Center for Migration Studies at WITS, which I'm happy to say was also supported by the EU, because we think supporting this type of activity is important. This initiative has developed a significant level of knowledge on regional, international migration and its impacts on the South African labour market through reviews of policy frameworks in the region, through quantitative and qualitative data on foreigner positions in South African labour market, as well as through a more detailed analysis in specific sectors such as health, hospitality, commercial agriculture and domestic work. In other words, getting the hard facts on the table. And let me, when discussing that, once more underline at this point that South Africa is not alone in facing the challenges of management of migration inflows and multifaceted migrant profiles. As I just said, the European Union itself is currently exposed to an exceptional situation where the plight of thousands, I can say 10,000s of migrants at sea with their lives in peril to cross the Mediterranean. In May 2015, the European Agenda on Migration was finalized, and the European Union strives with great difficulties. Don't think it is for a moment, and I know many of you know that it is easy in Europe, but we managed to put in place a number of immediate actions, but also the beginning of a longer-term EU migration policy that would address legal migration, but also irregular migration, border management and asylum policies. And despite the current difficulties, with the exceptional inflow of migrants that we all see daily on our televisions, it is important not to forget that the EU has, in the end, been able to establish a single market, a single labour market, underpinned by labour mobility within its borders. So we have achieved some of the things that really are needed, but as I said, with great difficulties. Now, given the similarities between the EU and South Africa, as if you like a magnet and a focal point for migrants, I am convinced, we are convinced in the delegation of the European Union here in Pretoria, that this project that we are launching today, as well as current initiatives taken, including by the EU, through its agenda on migration, will very significantly contribute to a useful and constructive, intensive dialogue between South Africa and the EU on migration, where we can learn from each other's experiences, because there is also a lot of admiration in Europe for the ways South Africa does certain things. We see the difficulties, but South Africa is also doing a number of things spot on. I would like to mention here also that the developmental dimension is essential, and the United Nations will shortly adopt the Sustainable Development Goals, in which migration-related targets will be included, along targets as promoting decent work, youth unemployment, youth employment, wage and social protection policies, and that all will help countries of origin to create better opportunities at home. The EU will continue to actively support migration-related targets as part of the final overall framework of the Sustainable Development Goals, and to emphasize the importance of harnessing the positive effects of migration. I say that once more, the positive effects of migration, as a horizontal part of the implementation of this wider post-2015 agenda. So, ladies and gentlemen, there is much work to do, both in South Africa and in the European Union. And at a very practical level, jobs will need to be created. Growth will need to be increased, but in a sustainable and manageable way. And of course, peace and security will need to be enhanced dramatically, including on the African continent. And possibly, and above all, the EU and South Africa will need to stand shoulder to shoulder to fight xenophobia in our societies and to work towards a world in which people are no longer so desperate that they trust their lives to criminals, to cross seas, to cross deserts and borders in a too often disastrous attempt to provide their children with a better future. So it is against this background that, to round off, the European Union feels very strongly about the cooperation in the framework of this project, feels very strongly about working with ILO, IOM, the UN, OECD, but above all with the South African and Southern African institutions to come to facts and figures to improve our policies and our concrete measures to improve the life of migrants. I wish you a very fruitful day, a very fruitful launch, and I'm very much looking forward with my team. Christophe Larose of my delegation is here. We are looking forward eventually to the results of this project. Thank you very much.